popular vote margin that Hillary Clinton won by 3 million votes. That was within 1.2% accuracy. Pretty darn good. But I didn't trust the polls, Trump versus Clinton. I looked at other data. For example, positive versus negative impressions. The studies have shown that question is answered honestly by most people. They don't always want to say who they voted for, but if you say, do you have a positive impression or a negative impression of Hillary Clinton, you'll get an answer that's usually accurate. On that question, going into October 28th, for the first time in 15 months, here are the facts, sir, Hillary Clinton got to 50-50 on positive versus negative. She'd been underwater negative for 15 months since the email story broke. Of course, Donald Trump was 3-1 underwater as unfavorable versus favorable. On October 28th, she was about at 50-50. Within 3 days after those headlines, when the Comey letter hit, Hillary Clinton under new criminal investigation, that positive versus negative impression question, she dropped within 3 days 2-1 negative and kept going down. Only one thing caused that, and that was the Comey letter.
Mr. Davis, in the lead up, you talk about the research you've done. In the epilogue, though, I'm interested in talking to you a little bit about that because as part of it, you write this. You say, whatever other reasons there may be to oppose an impeachment process investigation regarding Donald Trump, one of them cannot be to do so would be to flout the popular will by overturning the electoral vote count that he would not have earned without the fluke of James Comey's last-minute improper intervention. Can you expand on that?
Yes, this is a very important point of my book. Donald Trump is now contradicting every intelligence agency director who he appointed, every senior member of Congress, every observer, that the Russians intervened in our democracy to help him get elected. He denies that, as he denies almost everything else that's a fact. So when I did this research, I was against impeaching Donald Trump and still am, unless there's a bipartisan effort and a very high standard for removal. But the main argument against impeachment is the overturning of a popular election, unimpaired by an intervention that should not have occurred. I can't prove the Russians elected Donald Trump. My logic tells me that within Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, less than 1%, that the Russian campaign in favor of Trump that is now proven and agreed to by all of Trump's appointees. Trump's the only denier left. I can't prove that that cost Hillary Clinton the election. I can prove that right after the Comey letter, she dropped like a rock and nothing else but Comey's letter. That means that Trump cannot be opposed for impeachment because we are overturning an unimpaired election. There may be other reasons to oppose it, but we know that his election was a fluke, an aberration, the result of an alien, improper intervention by James Comey, who has never taken responsibility for giving this country Donald Trump as president. And I'm looking forward to reading the book where he gets to decide what the policies and standards are, not the rule of law, not the person he's supposed to report to, the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General. He, James Comey, he gets to decide what the higher loyalty is.
Mr. Davis, you mentioned those states. Michigan, she never went to. Wisconsin, I believe she went to once. Don't those place factors into how she eventually done?
Of course.
Those 80,000 people that made the difference.
Of course. And in retrospect, you can look at lots of mistakes. But as I would just remind you once again, she's taken ownership for mistakes. But two things can be true contemporaneously. One is a presidential candidate makes mistakes that might have changed the outcome. Another is on October 28th in the morning, she wins. On October 31, she's dropped like a rock. One thing happened. So the decisive second true fact, first true fact is she made mistakes in retrospect. The second true fact is, but for James Comey's letter, she wins the presidency. That's a fact.
The reaction from Mrs. Clinton from this book. What did she say to you about it?
Well, I visited with her before the inauguration, and we talked about my research. I was not intending to write this book. It was a painful book to write. I've written several books. This was the most painful. And when I showed her my data, not the head-to-head data, as much as the accurate data about people's impressions of her before the Comey letter and after, she recognized that I had assembled data that nobody else had compiled. And I recommend, if you don't want to read my book, Chapter 8 is where all the charts are and where all the data is.
Did she encourage you to go ahead?
She encouraged me. She encouraged me.
Did you get any reaction from Mr. Comey?
I asked to interview Mr. Comey. I wanted to get his viewpoint. I've talked to people close to Mr. Comey, close to the Deputy Attorney General on the critical day of October 27th. What happened? What was the debate? Why did you decide to send the letter? And Mr. Comey declined to interview me, and I know that happened because somebody very, very senior in the United States government and a close friend of Mr. Comey's asked him, Mr. Davis would like to get your point of view, and he had a right to say no and tell his own story, which he's about to in his book.
Ari is from Baltimore, Maryland, independent line. Lanny Davis, the author of The Unmaking of the President 2016. Go ahead.
Good morning. You mentioned that Hillary Clinton took ownership of her mistakes, and
yes.
Yet the biggest mistake that I saw, trying to be impartial and not be polarized like so many other people in this country are, the biggest mistake that I saw was that when they wanted to see her servers and her emails, she had her lawyers picking and deciding what was going to be accessible for the FBI and what was not. And anybody else in the United States, the FBI would have confiscated personal computers, working computers, looked at everything A to Z with a fine-tooth comb, and she was above the law with that. She picked and chose what she was going to be giving to them and not taking ownership of it. And if she felt she had nothing to hide, she would have given everything, let them make an impartial, independent investigation. And Mr. Comey, in my view, based on the limited information he had to go with, he made a decision that there was nothing that they could press charges on. And so the conference that he had, the conference that he showed, was called not to destroy her reputation, but was to say, based on the evidence that we have, the limited evidence that we have, that there's nothing we can press charges with.
Okay,
However,
thanks, caller.
Look, first of all, you make a valid point. People were suspicious that she didn't allow everybody to read through her personal emails, emails that anybody, including yourself, would not want to be published on the front page of a newspaper. Unlike you, Hillary Clinton's personal emails would have been published in the tabloids and elsewhere. None other than former Secretary of State Colin Powell, in an email, advised Hillary Clinton to use two devices, one not through the State Department, her own personal one, where she could use official and personal emails, and then at the end of her tenure, turn over her official ones. That came from Secretary of State Colin Powell. He used his own private device outside of the State Department state.gov server and used AOL's private server. And his server, the AOL server, during the run-up to the Iraq War, was hacked. James Comey, after 1 year of a forensic investigation of her private server, said, quote, "We have no evidence that there was ever a hack of Hillary Clinton's server." Having said that, in retrospect, with the wisdom of hindsight, Mrs. Clinton has said she should never have used a single device, and she should have used separate devices, distinguishing her personal emails, which most certainly should have been destroyed, as you would want yours to be, rather than on the front page of newspapers, and used a separate device for official business. I think she's recognized that with the wisdom of hindsight, she would have done it differently.
So just to clarify, she never had a state.gov address, email address.
She did not have a state.gov email address because her server was a Hillary Clinton email address. But this is a little fact, and I think it's a big fact that most people don't know. 80 or 90% of all the emails that she received were from State Department diplomats that she forwarded to others. So those individuals, over 300, did not use a secure communication channel because none of the 33,000 emails she received, not one, was labeled classified. Let me repeat that. Not one of the 33,000 emails that she received, and this is finally, James Comey had to admit this. He said there were a few, 3. It turned out 0 had the conspicuous classification label that 300 diplomats sent to her through non-secure channels because they didn't consider the information classified. Now, in retrospect, there were judgments made in retrospect that some of the information was classified, but was never labeled. That's why James Comey could not charge her criminally.
Jamaica, New York. Ryan, Democrats line.